Commitment 2022, 3rd Congressional Debate, in partnership with the League of Women Voters.
Welcome. I am Dee Pregliasco, President of the Louisville League of Women Voters. We are a nonpartisan civic engagement organization. We do not support parties or candidates. Educating people about voting and elections is one of our top priorities. Thank you to WLKY for broadcasting this important event to help the people of Louisville make an informed decision about the elections on the ballot November 8th. We have drafted the questions and they have not been provided to the candidates in advance. While there have been many forums this election season, we believe our questions further illuminate the issues facing our community. Thank you for watching, and be sure you, your family, and your friends vote. Voting is truly the bedrock of our democracy.
Hello and welcome to the WLKY 3rd Congressional Debate. I'm Mark Vanderhoff, and I want to welcome both candidates, Democrat Morgan McGarvey and Republican Stuart Ray. We'll begin with opening statements. Each candidate will have 90 seconds, and Mr. McGarvey won the draw, and we'll go first. Mr. McGarvey.
Thank you, Mark. 10 years ago, I ran for the state Senate. You know, our dining room table was the campaign headquarters. All of the yard signs were put together and assembled in our unfinished basement. And my premise for running was just as simple as our operation, that I would go to Frankfort, that I would stand up and fight for people, stay true to my values while working to get stuff done. And that's what I did. Every day I was in office, I was a member of the super minority. I became the Democratic leader of the Senate when Matt Bevin was governor. It was an uphill battle. Literally, my fight was to lead our efforts on the floor to protect women's rights, to make sure kids had access to health care, to make sure that teachers could keep their pensions. But I did it while working to get stuff done. I authored and passed 18 bills into law, and not just little things either. I passed the first insurance company mandate in 21 years, forcing insurance companies to pay for life-saving care for premature babies. I passed the first ever bill solely benefiting Louisville's historically black colleges and universities, making sure that kids at Simmons College had access to Kentucky tuition grant money. I passed laws protecting victims of domestic violence and human trafficking. Along the way, I learned that if you listen to people, you can get stuff done. And that's why I'm running for Congress, is to make sure that we build that consensus and we tackle the major problems of the day, making sure that women continue to have rights, that people have health care, that we improve education, and that we make this planet a little better place for everyone going forward.
All right, thank you, Mr. McGarvey. Mr. Ray?
Yeah, thanks, Mark, and thanks, WLKY and League of Women Voters, for hosting our debate today. I'm Stuart Ray, and I'm your 3rd District Republican candidate for Congress. I'm not originally from Louisville. I moved here when I was 9 years old. But I like to refer to myself as a Buckeye by birth and a Kentuckian by the grace of God. Although I can answer the proverbial question, I went to Ballard High School. After a brief stint at University of Louisville, I went on to work a 30-year career at Steel Technologies, a company my father founded. Unlike my opponent, I'm not a career politician. I've worked 35 plus years in business. I currently operate my own company, the Peregrine Company, which is a metals and trucking company. I'm a father, a grandfather, a businessman, and a problem solver. My priorities in Congress are to stop the wasteful, unsustainable spending that has led to this 40-year high record inflation, reverse a recession, killing this economy and driving up interest rates, and return the United States to become energy independent. We must bring good jobs to Louisville through economic development and work to improve our schools and education with a focus on parent involvement. We must secure our southern border and stop this inhumane border policy. We must return safety to Louisville by adding the much-needed 400-plus officers and implement community policing. These are serious times for a serious candidate that will fight for Louisville families in Congress.
All right, thank you, Mr. Ray. Now we'll move on to the questions. Each candidate will have 90 seconds to answer each question. The candidate who answers first will be allowed a 30-second rebuttal. Mr. McGarvey won the draw. So let's start with something that's hit every voter: high prices, right? What do you believe has caused this current bout of inflation, and what do you think Congress should do about it?
Yeah, we've seen it, Mark, whether it's at the grocery store, whether it's at the gas pump, inflation is high. Let's talk about a little bit how we got here, though. Right now, we see inflation going up, but we're coming out of a pandemic where we've all seen the supply chain problems. We're also watching a war going on right now with Putin attacking Ukraine, throwing the world's energy markets into disarray. And so I think there are things we can do about it. We've seen the Democrats actually tackle this issue by passing the Inflation Reduction Act, which lowers the cost of prescription drugs, takes on climate change, which can create some good-paying green jobs, and actually reduces the deficit by $300 billion. Not a single Republican voted for it. The Democrats also passed the Gas Price Gouging Prevention Act. This would allow the FTC to investigate why we're paying more at the pump, but gas company profits are at record highs. Shell Oil Company experienced the second highest profits ever in the company's history while we're paying more for gas prices. Not a single Republican in the House voted for it, and they filibustered to keep it from becoming law in the United States Senate. These are serious problems, and you see people tackling them. What you also see is one party working to address them, while the Republicans are doing nothing so they can use it as an election year wedge issue. They have no plan to help, and Democrats will be doing better.
Mr. Ray.
Well, we are experiencing 40-year record high inflation. And I am a firm believer that this unsustainable spending, similar to this Inflation Reduction Act, which has been around now for a number of months, and we continue to experience 8+% inflation month over month over month. The Biden, Pelosi, Schumer administration, they've spent since Biden's been in office, they've spent over $3 trillion. You know, I'm somewhat familiar with 40-year record high inflation. Actually, my father almost lost the company he founded, Steel Technologies, from the Jimmy Carter policies of the 70s that have put us right back into the Biden policies in the 2000s. Gas prices are up 60%. They were climbing well before the war in Ukraine between Russia, and we would all agree that Putin is out of control, and this war in Russia and Ukraine has driven prices up. But diesel now is skyrocketing, and it's also predicted to be a shortage over the next 2 to 6 weeks, that we don't have enough diesel in the pipeline. That's impacting our farmers. Our families are hurting in the grocery store. Everything in the grocery store is a record high price, from diapers that are petroleum-based to eggs and chicken. It's unsustainable. These are issues that are impacting mothers and families across the city of Louisville, both at the kitchen table and at the gas pump, and we have to pump the brakes on this unsustainable spending.
All right, Mr. McGarvey, it's your rebuttal.
Well, that explanation doesn't make a lot of sense. First of all, my opponent recognizes that there's 40-year high inflation right now, but leaves out the fact that it is a 70-year high in corporate profits. Yes, we're paying more, and these big corporations are making more than ever before, while no one's even thought about repealing the Trump tax cuts, which benefit the wealthiest corporations. Talk about what's going on in this country. We do feel the pain of recession. One party's trying to do something about it, and it might not be that much comfort, but when he talks about inflation here, he neglects to mention the inflation going on in the rest of the world. Right now in Great Britain, inflation is worse than us. It's being run by the conservatives and has nothing to do with the spending in this country.
All right, well, let's stick with pocketbook issues. What efforts would you support to reform the tax code, and would you keep or end the tax cuts of the previous administration? Mr. Ray, you're first this time.
No, I would retain the tax cuts of the previous administration, and they impacted significantly the middle class. So I know there's always a perception that tax cuts are to benefit the rich, but the reality is that the tax cuts of the previous administration did help the working families of Louisville, Kentucky, and this country. So I'm definitely a proponent of tax cuts. Right now, obviously, the $3 trillion that's been spent, we have over $31 trillion in national debt. So there are some serious issues out there from a balance sheet, as we would say in business standpoint. I definitely think we need to reduce the spending while stimulating the economy, and if the economy can rebound, then we'll generate more revenue to reduce this, not only the inflation, but hopefully the deficit as well.
All right, Mr. McGarvey.
Yeah, again, I think it's important to really point out what's happened. The Trump tax cuts, nearly $2 trillion in tax cuts, went to benefit the wealthiest individuals and wealthiest corporations in this country. They cut those taxes on the wealthiest individuals and wealthiest corporations. And guess what? They didn't cut spending. Every year under Donald Trump's presidency, the deficit went up. Every year under Joe Biden's presidency, the deficit has actually been reduced, including in the Inflation Reduction Act, which sets a tax in which corporations have to pay their fair share while making sure that prescription drugs are lower for the rest of us. The Donald Trump tax cuts were for the wealthiest individuals. That is why they passed them. They did nothing on spending, and it is now hurting the pocketbooks of everyday Americans.
Mr. Ray, your rebuttal.
Yes. I mean, Biden is currently raising the taxes on Americans and on corporations, which is going to stifle economic growth in the middle of a recession and in the middle of record high inflation and interest rates that are climbing 0.75% this week alone. They've gone up 1.5 points in the last 2 months. So the Biden economic policies have wrecked this economy in less than 2.5 years, and they have to stop.
Well, there are some estimates that every time we have someone shot in Kentucky, it's costing Kentucky $900,000. I mean, there's the healthcare costs, the insurance costs, the court system costs, and that doesn't include the emotional toll on the victims and their families. So what would you do if you're elected to Congress to reduce gun violence and reduce those costs? Mr. McGarvey.
Yeah, and this is where you see a difference between me and my opponent. First of all, I think we need to fully fund public safety. And that means we need to recruit and retain law enforcement officials. It also means we need more social workers. We need more support for addiction, more support for mental health. It means we need to go after the root causes of crime with everything from affordable housing to education to healthcare. But you cannot talk about crime in this city or in this country without talking about guns. I believe we need more common sense gun reform, things like universal background checks, things like an assault weapons ban. My opponent, for months on his website, including after the Uvalde shooting, said he would never consider any gun reform proposal ever, and that's a, quote, blood promise. I took my kids to school the day after the Uvalde shooting. I think every policymaker in America should have been forced to drop a child off at an elementary school the day after that shooting, because we can do more to protect our communities. We can fully fund public safety, and we can have common sense gun reform.
Mr. Ray.
Gun violence is definitely out of control throughout Louisville. It's been the failed policies of both local leadership and federal leadership for many, many years. And so I don't think we can hardly look at certain individuals and blame the gun violence against them. My opponent falls short of saying he wants to fully fund the police. He says he wants to fully fund public safety. But I did get the endorsement by the FOP, which was across the state of Kentucky, but also by Metro FOP. And we have to not only fully fund the police, we have to hire the 400 to 500 officers that we're so woefully short of in Louisville, Kentucky. And that compounds not only the safety to our community and our children that are experiencing this gun violence, the shortage in our police officers, but it also impacts the safety of their fellow officers. When they're 300 to 400 officers short and they call and they go into a criminal situation that maybe experiences gun violence, they themselves don't have backups for the issues that they're facing. So these are the failed policies, local and federal, and I'm willing to work with the Department of Justice or do anything from a federal standpoint that we can do to improve the safety in Louisville. It's out of control.
All right, Mr. McGarvey, your rebuttal.
Yeah, I do believe we should fully fund public safety. I've never seen a government agency do better with fewer resources. But I've worked with local law enforcement in my time in the state Senate. I've worked with local law enforcement on issues involving guns. Just this year, I worked with law enforcement to defeat a bill that would have allowed anybody to carry a gun into the courtroom. I worked with law enforcement to try and beat back the senseless bill that allows anyone to carry a gun concealed without a permit. Officers were opposed to that because they didn't think it would keep officers safe. That's something my opponent supports.
All right, let's talk about abortion. This is kind of a two-part question. First of all, would you support or will you support Kentucky's Amendment Number 2? And second, how would you vote if there was a proposal for either national legislation banning abortions or national legislation guaranteeing the right to an abortion? Mr. Ray, you're first this time.
Yes, I was supportive of the Dobbs decision from the Supreme Court that returned the decision of abortion back to the state of Kentucky, which, as you pointed out, has led to Amendment 2. So now the decision is in all of the Commonwealth of Kentucky for them to decide on how they feel they want to vote on abortion, whether up or down on Amendment 2. I've always said that in my personal life, I am Catholic and I'm pro-life, but I just need to point out that my opponent, Mr. McGarvey, ran an op-ed in the last week that says that I was opposed to abortion in the cases of rape, incest, and the life of the mother. And that's an outright lie. He's been in front of me in 2 debates where I have declared, now a third, where I've declared I am acceptable of rape, incest, and life of the mother, otherwise known as the exceptions. And on TV, he's lying about my record. So this is a very, very serious issue, and I'm happy it's before all the voters of the Commonwealth of Kentucky. I trust them.
Mr. McGarvey.
Thank you. This is where you see a stark difference between me and my opponent. For the first time in the history of our country, the Supreme Court took rights away from women. We must put Roe v. Wade back into federal law. I will be a vote to do that. My opponent is also being misleading about the state of the law in Kentucky. He says he supports the Dobbs decision. The Dobbs decision put in place a trigger law in Kentucky, which means that no woman can terminate her pregnancy at any time for any reason, including rape or incest, unless the mother's health is in imminent danger. This means if you have an ectopic pregnancy, you might not be able to do anything about it unless you're in sepsis. It means if you have been raped, you are forced to carry that child. It means for the 14 girls under the age of 15, the youngest whom was 9, who needed an abortion last year in Kentucky, we will be forcing children to give birth. It is cruel. It is extreme. You see him not answer the question about whether he would support a national ban, because he will. He refuses to acknowledge the exemptions here in Kentucky. But if the voters vote on this constitutional amendment, that is the law. He said the voters get the chance to make a decision. The decision was made by their legislators this year when they voted down exemptions to rape or incest 30-8 in the Senate. I was there. That's what the law is. When you are saying you support the Dobbs decision and you support this amendment, you are saying you support the law as it currently stands in Kentucky, which is cruel, it is extreme, and we need protections for women on a federal level.
A rebuttal, Mr. Ray?
Yes, Mr. McGarvey just misrepresented the truth again. I just said I am for the exceptions, which is rape, incest, and the life of the mother. He references these 9-year-olds that are pregnant that can't have access to abortion. If that were the case, that's statutory rape. So that fits within the realm of the exceptions. So I trust the Commonwealth of Kentucky. I trust the voters, and I'm glad they have an opportunity to vote on Amendment 2 in November next week.
Yeah, Mark, I'm going to butt in here really quickly right now because we got to get something straight on the record. The law in Kentucky today that this amendment will keep in place is that no woman can terminate her pregnancy at any time for any reason. There are no exemptions for rape or incest in Kentucky's law now.
That law's out of Frankfort, where he currently works.
And I
This
opposed
is a
it.
very emotional topic.
And I
We're
opposed
going to
it.
move on.
And when
We
you
get
say that
one
you support,
rebuttal each.
I know, and you say you support the Dobbs decision and
Mark,
you support
I respect you cutting it
the
off.
amendment, that's what you're supporting.
All right, gentlemen, let's remember that voters are also watching to see
Yes,
how
sir.
well you abide by the rules. Let's talk about the U.S. support for Ukraine. Do you support U.S. support for Ukraine against this Russian invasion? And by extension, what do you see as the United States' role in international situations like this? Mr. McGarvey, you're first on this one.
Yeah, thanks. I think this is actually an area in which I am really glad Donald Trump is not president right now. We are seeing the President of the United States rally our allies abroad in NATO and deliver the aid and the resources, the weapons necessary for the Ukrainian people to fight back against this unprovoked war by Vladimir Putin. So far, they've been successful. I say so far because we don't know how this is going to turn. The news is changing every day, but so far it's been successful without a single pair of American boots being on the ground. I think it's important for America to be a world leader. I think it's important for us to support our democratic allies abroad. And I think that so far we have done a good job of marshaling the world's resources against a tyrant out of Russia.
Mr. Ray.
Yeah, I think we were all supportive of Ukraine initially when we saw this unprovoked building of troops. You know, Putin was building 150,000 troops on the border of Ukraine months before he invaded, when actually the current Congressman Yarmuth said on a radio show 2 weeks before that he didn't think it was much to do about anything. I'm paraphrasing, but he thought it was being overblown and that Putin would not invade. It just goes to show how not only the administration but our current congressman, who has endorsed Mr. McGarvey, ignored the 150,000 building of troops in Ukraine. The problem we have now is we don't have an end game. And I think we need to very much identify where the billions of support that we're sending to Ukraine are going. And I think we need to lead with diplomacy. I think we need to make sure Ukraine understands it's not a bottomless checkbook, that we just can't fund their war forever, and that there has to be an end game, because so often we go into these international conflicts and there's no end game that's perfectly defined, and we spend our country's treasure, which we don't have a lot of money at this point, the billions and billions of dollars for another conflict in the world. I think we need to identify the end game.
All right. Mr. McGarvey, your rebuttal.
Yeah, I think, again, we've seen Vladimir Putin throw the world's energy markets into disarray, impacting gas prices here at home. I think we see Vladimir Putin unprovoked attacking a democracy in Europe. We're seeing the largest outbreak of land warfare in Europe since 1945. As a world leader, along with our allies, I am glad that we are marshaling our resources to push back against this unchecked aggression from Vladimir Putin. It's obviously an evolving situation. I think my opponent and I agree we need to be over there, and we need to make sure that the Ukrainian people are staying safe. And of course, we're going to monitor the situation and try to push back against further aggression.
All right. Well, the House has passed the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, as well as the Freedom to Vote Act, and those are waiting votes in the Senate. Do you support the aims of these bills, and why or why not? Mr. Ray, you're first.
Well, I'm certainly for, we all want good elections, and I certainly have accepted results of elections in the past. I actually narrowly won my primary by 58 votes, so no one is understands close elections better than I do. But I want the elections to be accessible by everyone, but they also have to have controls in place so we have legitimate election process throughout the Commonwealth of Kentucky. And I think it sounds like our Secretary of State and certainly our county clerk are committed to those this coming November, this next Tuesday, and that I'm supportive of that.
Mr. McGarvey.
Yes, I have always supported efforts to increase voting. I think the more people that participate in democracy, the better off we all are. I would support the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. I will co-sponsor the John Lewis Voting Rights Act if it hasn't passed, and I'm lucky enough to get elected to Congress, because we need to encourage more free and fair elections. I think we also have to recognize, when talking about the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, what's going on in this country right now. There are people who are armed in Arizona standing outside of ballot places. For federal office and statewide office across the country, there are 291 Republicans currently running who deny the results of the last election. There are cases coming up before the Supreme Court this next term that deal with everything from voting rights to gerrymandering, influencing how people are represented in their government. Unfortunately, voting is still under attack from the right. And I think we must have these protections in place to ensure that more people have the ability to vote and that our elections remain fair and free.
A rebuttal, Mr. Ray?
Sure. I mean, I don't know why we would say that there's an attack from the right on voting rights. I am certainly want everyone that legally can have access to vote to be able to vote. I think what we saw during the pandemic of 2020, all the states tried to open voting up to the best of their ability because we were in the throes of a pandemic. And now that's implemented good policies like early voting access. But the reality is you have to have an identification, you have to be registered to vote, and you have to either early vote or vote in person or absentee vote. And I want to support these elections.
All right. Well, immigration has been a hot topic for a long time, but bipartisan consensus has really eluded Congress. What would you do on this issue? Mr. McGarvey?
Yeah, I think immigration reform is a really important issue. First and foremost, we all want to make sure that we have safe, secure borders. But let's be honest, not passing immigration reform has been a real failure of Congress. Not one party, but Congress. We need a broad immigration reform system that not only brings 11 million people out of the shadows, but does create a broad pathway to citizenship. I think this is something we can do. You are seeing a lot of different interests gather on this issue. Everything from the human rights community to the business community that want to see this immigration reform be accomplished. What we need are people who've shown the ability to listen and solve problems in the past, to sit down and solve this one. That's what I've done every single day since being in office. It's what I will continue to do and work on this issue going forward.
Mr. Ray.
Well, I think Morgan and I both agree that we definitely need immigration reform. I've been saying that we need a broader immigration policy that welcomes more migrants and more people from around the world into the United States. And it has been a colossal failure that we haven't written a solid immigration policy, and I'll go to address the southern border. But let's not forget who's in charge of the executive branch on both sides of Congress, the Senate and Congress. And it's the Democrats that have ignored the southern border. We have a crisis at the southern border, and I come at it from a different angle. I think it's inhumane to give false hope to people to go hundreds of miles to the southern border, then potentially go hundreds of miles past the southern border. They're subject to these coyotes. They're subject to the human, sex, and this drug trafficking is totally impacting Louisville. The fentanyl that comes in to our streets in Louisville, we know it's all pouring in from the southern border. And the reality is this administration is completely ignoring the southern border policy. They're letting people come in, and that's adding, in addition to that, 100 people were on the terrorist watch list that have been retained coming in through the southern border. So we have security issues, and we have a southern border crisis that's inhumane.
Mr. McGarvey, a rebuttal.
Yeah, we've talked several times in this debate about things like the John Lewis Voting Rights Act that haven't passed. They haven't passed because the Republicans have blocked it. Let's talk about the Republicans on immigration right now. They could pass it, but only if they have some Republican support. Look at what happened under Trump. President Trump had the White House. He packed the courts. He had the Congress. He put people in camps. He put people in cages. He separated children from their families. And it didn't work. You want to talk about inhumane? That's what's inhumane. And it didn't work, and it pandered, and we don't have a comprehensive immigration reform because of it.
All right, well, hopefully the worst of the pandemic is behind us now, but we're looking at a pretty nasty flu season.
Do I get a quick
coming up.
rebuttal to that or no? I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Mr. Ray.
Well, I just want to remind Mr. McGarvey that it was the Obama-Biden administration that had the camps and the cages that were initially set up. And it's currently, we always want to go back to a couple of years to the Trump administration. Biden is the president. Harris is the vice president. They have control of our southern border policy right now, and it's a failure.
All right, guys. Like I was saying, the pandemic is hopefully behind us, but we got a pretty nasty flu season coming up, it's looking like. What do you think is the role of the federal government when we have a pandemic or another health-related disaster? Mr. Ray, you're first on this
Sure.
one.
I think it's to lead but not mandate. I mean, I'm certainly a believer in vaccinations. We all had to show our vax cards to come into WLKY, and I was happy to get my vaccinations, and I'm certainly always been a firm believer in the flu shots and get them every year. But I think we have to stop before any kind of mandating is concerned, and I think we all are looking back on what's transpired with the shots that we received for COVID-19, and so many people, we all have friends, we all have stories where someone either got their shot or their booster, and a month later they got COVID. I'm a believer, and I hope that those cases lighten their their symptoms, and then they got through it significantly easier. But I don't think government has any role in mandating vaccinations when it comes to COVID or the flu, but I encourage everyone to go out and get them.
Mr. McGarvey.
Yeah, this is an interesting issue that I think, all of us who experienced the pandemic, particularly those of us with kids who are home from school, saw a success of government in the development and distribution, along with private industry, of vaccines, getting a vaccine out there that people were able to use. I think we can continue that success by developing and distributing things like the flu vaccine. But where I look at the role of the federal government in something like this is actually preparedness for the next pandemic, or even something like the flu. Imagine this, people dying in huge building fires is almost a thing of the past because we mandated that buildings have sprinklers. What if we mandated things like air filtration systems, making sure that you have the right filters in place in new construction that would allow better ventilation, that keep the distribution of these diseases from spreading as easily? I think there's a lot we can do that would actually help people stay healthier, that doesn't go to mandating a vaccine, but shows how we can keep people safe in the face of the next pandemic, even if that's something like the seasonal flu.
Mr. Ray, a rebuttal?
I have not a whole lot more to add other than the fact that I do think one failure we saw is when we shut down schools for an extended period of time, and I'm sure we're going to touch on education later, but what we saw was the nation and Kentucky are in terrible shape from an education standpoint. We know that keeping these kids out of school, keeping them masked, has definitely deteriorated their learning skills and their communication skills, and I think we need to keep kids safe, but in school.
All right, well, tornadoes and floods have cost Kentucky hundreds of millions, if not billions. It's costing the nation trillions. And there's a lot of people who believe that climate change is increasing the severity and the frequency of natural disasters, which could cost the nation a lot more money. So I want to put you both on the record. Do you believe in climate change? And what do you think Congress should do to address climate change? Mr. McGarvey, you're first.
Thank you. Climate change is real. This is not a political point. I remember watching, after the tornadoes devastated 250 miles of West Kentucky, Al Roker, not a political talking head, the meteorologist Al Roker said on the Today Show, these weather events are happening because temperatures are rising in this part of the country, moving those weather events out of places like Oklahoma and Kansas to the more populated centers in the eastern part of the country. I think not only is climate change real, I think saving our planet is of the utmost importance. And I'm bullish on this front. Kentucky powered the last energy revolution, and we paid for it. We paid for it with the majesty of our mountains, the cleanliness of our drinking water, and the lives of our miners. We deserve to be on the forefront of the next energy revolution, transitioning away from fossil fuels and creating good-paying green jobs right here in Kentucky. This is something where we've already been a leader. Governor Beshear has done an excellent job in securing $7 billion in economic development to make Kentucky the electric car battery manufacturing capital of the country. There is so much more we can do. This area needs to be at the center of it, and not only will it create good-paying jobs, but it's going to help save the planet.
Mr. Ray.
Yeah. By the way, Morgan, might not be good form to quote NBC weatherman Al Roker on WLKY. But yes, I'm certainly a believer in that the climate evolves and that the climate is definitely changing. And we've seen some horrific devastation to both Western Kentucky and Eastern Kentucky this year. Kentucky has definitely taken their, unfair share of the brunt of these tragedies and these environmental devastations. But at the end of the day, where we're also backing into is this green initiative that's being forced down the throats by the Biden, Pelosi, Schumer administration, and it's leading to these record high gas prices. The reality is 90%, 95% of the people out there, most of the people in this room are probably all driving gas-consuming automobiles, and they're forcing the gas prices up, I believe, by restricting the production of American energy, and the pain is part of the plan. They're inflicting the pain on the citizens of Louisville and the people of the United States through high gas prices to try to enforce their green initiative. And it's just not fair. We need energy independence.
Mr. McGarvey, the rebuttal is yours.
Yeah, number one, it's simply not true. This is going to encourage energy independence here in this country while saving the planet, which is a good thing. Talk about high gas prices. Yes, we all see the high gas prices. But our gas prices are lower than in many other places in the world. I go back to these started when Vladimir Putin attacked Ukraine, throwing the world's energy markets into disarray. That's why gas prices are up everywhere, not just in the United States. Let's create some good paying jobs. You talk about oil production. There are 9,000 permits right now in this country that have been approved that the oil companies aren't using because we need to transition to a better and greener economy.
All right, speaking of the environment, there is a Environmental Protection Agency in our country. It was actually formed by a Republican president, Richard Nixon, and it was later approved by Congress on a bipartisan vote. But there are currently some efforts to dismantle the EPA. Do you support those efforts to dismantle the EPA, and why or why not? Mr. Ray?
I'm just going to back up for a second to say that gas prices started to surge long before the invasion of Ukraine. They started to surge really when Biden got into office, and they certainly surged when he threatened to destroy and put out of business the petroleum industry. As it relates to the EPA, I think we've seen what they can and can't do. I mean, there's no doubt that some regulations for the environment are a good thing, but they also were regulating the baby formula factory, I believe in Indiana, that produced nearly 50% of the baby formula in the country. They shut that factory down, and no one from this administration or the EPA predicted a baby shortage formula. I mean, I'm a businessman. If you cut 50% of production of everything, you're going to have a crisis and you're going to have a shortage. And that impacted young families in Louisville, Kentucky, and really throughout the country. And those are the things that we cannot add additional regulations and burden to business, and they're not even being efficient. They shut down a baby formula plant and don't predict a shortage.
Mr. McGarvey?
I think you brought up a good point when you said that it's a Republican administration that started the Environmental Protection Agency. It started the Environmental Protection Agency because when left to their own devices, these massive corporations were willfully and wantonly polluting everywhere they could in this state. Look at what happened here in Louisville with Rubbertown, one of the first Superfund sites in the entire country that needed to be cleaned up. Look what's happened in our Ohio River and what's needed to happen there. These cleanups wouldn't have happened if there hadn't been a watchdog agency out there trying to keep our land, our country, our community clean for the rest of us. As we look at things like preserving our natural beauty and keeping our planet safe, the Environmental Protection Agency has played a role in this, and to dismantle it will be to give all of that power and discretion back to these wealthiest corporations who care only about their profits, not about preserving our communities and keeping them safe.
Mr. Ray, a rebuttal?
Yeah, well, it's always let's blame the wealthy corporations, yet when people need economic development opportunities and people need good paying jobs, we lean towards these corporations to come into our community, hopefully in Louisville. I'd like to see economic development throughout a well-balanced Louisville, including the West End and including the South End. So as my opponents always like to make villains out of big corporations, we need corporations to make investments in the city of Louisville, and I'm here to support that.
All right, well, the January 6th committee is finalizing its work. Do you support the aims of this committee? And what do you think about the events of January 6th? How did that affect our country? Mr. McGarvey?
Yes, I absolutely support the work of the January 6th committee. I think it's incredibly important. I remember where I was when we got the news that people were attacking the United States Capitol, trying to overthrow the valid election of the President of the United States. I was sitting on the floor of the state Senate. People started leaving to watch on their phones. I felt sick at my stomach. We have to understand why this happened, who provoked it, and who should be held responsible. We see still our democracy is under attack. As I said earlier, there are 291 Republicans running for federal or statewide office who are denying what happened in the election. There are only 2 Republicans on the ballot who stood up for it and who wanted to investigate what happened on January 6th. We can't have these kind of attacks on democracy. As Benjamin Franklin said when asked at the Constitutional Convention, what type of government do you have? He said, a republic, if you can keep it. It was Congressman David Obey who said, democracy does not guarantee a happy ending. We must continue to investigate these wrongs to make sure that they don't happen again, and we preserve the democracy and the promise of America.
Mr. Ray.
I have personally condemned the actions of January 6th when they became violent and they attacked the Capitol and threatened our government officials. I totally denounce that and condemn it. And if there's been any, as it relates to the committee, if there's been any laws that have been violated, I'm all for prosecuting anyone that has violated the law. I do think that, often my opponent wants to go back to the Trump administration and refer to that. I'm really moving forward. There's all kinds of investigations that have been threatened, but this country has such significant problems that we're facing when it comes to inflation, when it comes to a recession, when it comes to unsustainable spending, and now interest rates going up, well over 7% now. They're going to shoot up to double digits. That I think we, rather than investigate for investigation's sake, I think we need to move the country forward, and we need to address the serious problems that are really hurting American and Louisville families in this country.
Mr. McGarvey, your rebuttal.
Yeah, I'm actually kind of stunned. I think you just heard my opponent basically say he would not move to continue investigating what happened on January 6th at a time when we see the rhetoric being raised to levels. The Speaker of the House's husband was just attacked in his home. There are people with guns outside ballot boxes in Arizona. There's 291 election deniers on the ballot. This is something we have to get to the root of, because we can't do all the other things we want to do in public service if our democracy is taken away from us. It is a real threat, and we must have people in charge who are willing to protect it.
Well, we've seen a lot of outside money flowing into races in this election cycle. A lot of people say that's because of Citizens United and the super PACs that came after that. What kind of election reform do you support? Mr. Ray, you're first.
Well, that's funny because we're a grassroots effort, and a lot of people associate Republicans with wealth and getting heavily funded elections. The reality is, throughout this country, it's practically, in many cases, 2 to 3 to 4 to 1 of the money being raised by the Democrats than the Republicans. My campaign has been completely a grassroots effort. We have gotten donations from all throughout this community and from both parties, to be honest with you, from Democrats and Republicans and from independents. So I'm more of a grassroots politician. I put out my own yard signs, and we make our own phone calls, and we do it all in-house. So I haven't been the beneficiary of really hundreds of thousands of dollars being brought in the primary from outside money. I haven't benefited from that in any capacity. So I'm for grassroots politics.
Mr. McGarvey.
It's funny to hear. I mean, you yourself put $100,000 of your own money into your campaign. Look, I think that Citizens United, next to the Dobbs decision, is one of the worst Supreme Court decisions of the 21st century, allowing all of this dark money to come into politics. I've been endorsed by Citizens United because I would vote to get rid of the Citizens United decision and get rid of the money and the influence it has in politics. This is a position I've held for a long time. In the state Senate, I voted against things like raising the donation limit to political candidates here in the state of Kentucky because I thought there was too much influence from money in politics here. So I am not a self-funding candidate. I want to get rid of decisions like Citizens United, get rid of the dark money, and stop the influence that it has in politics.
Mr. Ray, rebuttal.
I have not self-funded other than to get the campaign up and started. And yet in the primary, nearly $1 million came into my opponent's campaign from a cryptocurrency billionaire that lives most of his time in the Caribbean. So when it comes to campaign finance reform, our campaign has no problems whatsoever.
Well, gentlemen, you both know that polarization is evident at all levels of our politics and our communities, even in our families. So if you're elected, what would you do to try to break this polarization? Mr. McGarvey?
Thanks. This is what I've done every day since being in office. As I said, I'm going to run for office to go to Frankfurt, to stand up and fight for people to stay true to my values, and to work to get things done. When asked why I was running for Congress, it's a bigger race, and all of a sudden you've got things like this debate here on TV. I said, why are you running for Congress? I said, it's simple. I'm going to run for Congress because I want to stand up and fight for people, stay true to my values, but working to get things done. And what I've learned along the way is to be an effective leader. The two most impactful things you can say in government are, I don't know, and what do you think? It's by listening to each other. That's how we build consensus. It's not by finger pointing and name calling. It's not by continuing to have extremist and divisive leaders like Donald Trump and those who either stand up for him or who stand silent to his tactics and the way he is dividing our country. I think we have to reduce the rhetoric. Otherwise, we're going to continue to see the types of despicable attacks that we've seen recently. The other thing it will do is it will allow us to continue to work together to make big progress, because I refuse to believe that Washington is broken. And I do believe we can work together to solve the major problems that face us and that our best days are ahead.
Mr. Ray?
Yeah, I think we all go into these campaigns we want a civil and an inclusive campaign, and I certainly want to work with anyone that if it's in the best interest of Louisville, Kentucky, and my constituents. I was appointed actually by a Democrat Governor Steve Beshear, to the Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife Board. And while I was on that board, I served with the majority Democrats and the minority of Republicans. It was 5-4. And that majority Democrat board appointed me chair the last 2 years that I served on that board, proving that, first of all, fish and wildlife shouldn't be partisan. And there's many issues that I think you even hear Morgan and I agreeing on, some we haven't even touched on yet, education and pre-K. But there's many issues I think that we can work together on, and I'm all for that. And I do have a history of working across the aisle with Democrats, even on a government-appointed board or commission.
Mr. McGarvey, your rebuttal.
Yeah, let's be really honest about this. Politics has never been an easy thing, always a little bit of a contact sport. But the type of rhetoric we've seen really started with Donald Trump. My opponent supports Donald Trump. He donated to his re-election campaign. He supported him for re-election. Donald Trump just said last night he is very, very likely, probable to run again. And then this morning a report came out that said he might announce as soon as November 14th. I doubt my opponent will stand up to him and will probably support him if he's the Republican nominee. We don't need that type of divisive and extremist leader in this country or people in our Congress who support them.
All right, guys, let's talk about your qualifications. What makes you more qualified than your opponent to represent the 3rd Congressional District? Mr. Ray?
Yes, thank you. First of all, I have to turn that back a little bit. I don't think you can assume who I would support in a presidential campaign. I certainly have publicly stated I didn't vote for Biden or Pelosi or Clinton in the past 2 elections, so I did.
So did you vote for Donald Trump?
I did support. Yeah, I supported the Republican candidates.
And would you support him again if he ran?
We have Nikki Haley, we have Tim Scott, we have Kristi Noem, Ron DeSantis. We have so much great potential in the Republican Party. It's amazing. As it relates to what my qualifications are, I'm not a political insider. I haven't worked 10 or 11 years in Frankfurt at all. I've been a businessman for 40 years of my life. I've worked for both large companies like Steel Technologies, including their international division, which had a Japanese partnership. And then I went off and in the last 12 years have run my own companies. And what these things require are fiscal responsibilities, fiscal management, running a budget, and supporting your payroll and supporting the people within your company. And those are experiences that I think will prove very well in Congress. I just don't think we need more political outsiders. And I don't think we need to be compared to Donald Trump anymore, because I'm looking at who the president is, and I'm looking at the next 2 to 4 years, not 2 years ago.
Mr. McGarvey.
Yeah, I think the first qualification is when asked questions, I'll answer them directly. Look, I don't understand why we talk about experience as being a bad thing. I have experience being a legislator. I'm proud of that experience. I'm proud of my proven ability to go in as a member of the minority in the Kentucky General Assembly and pass big pieces of legislation that matter to the people of Kentucky, despite the uphill battle I faced. We need leaders who have proven that they have the ability to work and solve the problems that face our country. That is what is at stake in this election. And also, I think my time's not up yet because I'm not on rebuttal. So if we could start that time over again, thank you. So I am ready to go to Washington. I'm ready to be a fighter for this community, to do what I've always done, to listen, to build consensus, to try and solve our problems. You know, if you went to the doctor, you wouldn't want him to say, I've got no experience doing this. If you went to an auto mechanic, you wouldn't want to say, well, this is the first one of these I've ever done. So I think we need people who have the proven ability to do it. My opponent's only experience with government is when he's failed to pay the taxes on his Florida beach home 3 separate times. And I don't think that's what we need at this time in our government.
All right, Mr. Ray, your rebuttal.
Yeah, I mean, I've signed a term limit pledge. I would go to Washington and only serve 3 terms. I assure you my opponent will want to go to Washington and serve for decades. I think we need to bring new, fresh, political outsiders' ideas to Washington, try to fix this cluster that's going on in this administration and Congress and the Senate, led by my opponent's party. And I've signed a 3-term limit pledge, and ask him if he's signed that pledge, because I assure you he hasn't.
Since I was asked a question on that, Mark, and asserted something, can I get a little response?
I think we've been pretty lenient with the rebuttals, and we're drawing close to our time here.
Yeah.
This next question might be the most difficult question of the debate. And for the timers, they'll each get 1 minute, and there will be no rebuttal on this next one.
Okay.
What is something positive that you can say about your opponent? Mr. McGarvey, you're first.
Yeah, this is actually an easy question for me. In the state government, one of the organizations I've really cared about and worked for is Mary Hurst here in Louisville. They deal with, honestly, some of our most vulnerable young girls. And as we've tried to work with them in the state government to make sure that they continue to get the resources they need to survive, I can say that my opponent was the board chair of Mary Hurst, who oversaw a lot of that really good work. I think that's something he's done really well, and I'm grateful to his service and to our community in that regard.
All right, Mr.
Thanks,
Ray.
Morgan. And I think Morgan and I can both proudly say, no, it's not a hard question to answer. Morgan's obviously proven he's a wonderful family man. He has a beautiful family and young kids, and is juggling a career and his service to our state government in Frankfort, and while also running for Congress. And I think we both know that that's not an easy task. And as a family man, he and I are both juggling those same things. So really his public service should be commended because he has served in Frankfort, and we know that's not neither easy as being in the minority, nor is it easy because it's not very fruitful.
Well, thank you to both candidates. That's all the time we have for questions. Now each candidate will have 90 seconds for a closing statement. Mr. McGarvey will go first.
Thank you, Mark. In 4 days, the polls will close. This is a really big moment for our city. We have retirements in everything from our Metro Council to our judges to our congressmen of 16 years. We need to make sure that we are electing leaders who are capable of solving our problems. And in this debate, I think you've seen a stark contrast between visions. I've shown the ability to fight for us, staying true to our values and getting things done in Frankfort. That's what I want to do in Washington, because we have big problems to solve. We must protect women's rights and codify Roe v. Wade. We must continue the work on sensible gun reform. We must have people who are willing to pass legislation that will put money into the pocketbooks of everyday Americans, lowering the cost of goods and working on inflation. We have to have people who are serious about health care, about education, about making sure that our democracy stays intact. That is what I have always fought for. It's what I will continue to fight for. And it's why I'm running for Congress. I appreciate everyone going out and voting, and I hope that you will run with me.
Mr. Ray, your closing
I'd like
statement.
to echo Morgan's sentiment. We'd all like everyone to get out and vote and take our democracy very seriously. I'd like to thank the League of Women Voters for hosting us today. This has been a great debate, Mark. Thank you. The people of Louisville, though, are hurting with fears of safety throughout this community, prices at the gas pump, and prices in the grocery stores, and really poor economic opportunity throughout the entire city of Louisville, including the West End and the South End. And we need this to change. My opponent often declares that climate change is on the ballot in November. He says equity and equality are on the ballot in November, and empathy and progressive values are on the ballot in November. He even goes as far as saying decency and democracy are on the ballot in November. And while I think most of these things are wonderful sentiments and feelings, these are really serious times, and the people of our community need our help. Because I believe inflation and the recession is on the ballot in November. Skyrocketing interest rates is on the ballot in November. Economic development opportunities, good job opportunities throughout all of Louisville is on the ballot in November. The lives, safety, education of our children and people is on the ballot in November. And no, democracy is not on the ballot in November. Democracy is the ballot in November. So I encourage everyone to go out and vote for Stuart Ray next Tuesday on November 8th.
All right, that's all the time that we have for today's debate. I want to thank both candidates for joining us, and I want to thank the League of Women Voters again. Just a reminder, Election Day is Tuesday, November the 8th. Polls are open from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m., and you can go to WLKY.com for a complete list of races and an election guide for information that you need to know ahead of Election Day. Don't forget to vote for WLKY. I'm Mark Vanderoff.